Mr. Solzhenitsyn's life has been well documented. No brief biography that I could give you now would add to his measure or your understanding of him. He speaks through his work, and today we are honored that he has come to Harvard to share his thoughts. Because he feels hesitant in the English language, he has chosen to deliver his address in his native Russian. In simultaneous translation, we will hear the voice of Mrs. Irina Alberti. It is with a genuine sense of privilege that I present to you this morning's honorary degree recipient and Nobel laureate, Aleksandr I. Solzhenitsyn.
How is translation in order? My voice is...
Here it will be. I am sincerely happy to be here on the occasion of the 327th commencement of this old and most prestigious university. My congratulations and very best wishes to all of today's graduates. Harvard's motto is Veritas. Many of you have already found out, and others will find out in the course of their lives, that truth eludes us if we do not concentrate our attention totally on its pursuit. But even while it eludes us, the illusion of knowing it still lingers and leads to many misunderstandings. Also, truth seldom is pleasant. It is almost invariably bitter. There is some bitterness in my today's speech too. But I want to stress that it comes not from an adversary, but from a friend. 3 years ago, in the United States, I said certain things which at that time appeared unacceptable. Today, however, many people agree with what I then said. The split in today's world is perceptible even to a hasty glance. Any of our contemporaries readily identifies two world powers, each of them already capable of entirely destroying the other. However, understanding of the split often is limited to this political conception that danger may be abolished through successful diplomatic negotiations or by achieving a balance of armed forces. The truth is that the split is a much profounder and a more alienating one, that the rifts are more than one can see at first glance. This deep, manifold split bears the danger of manifold disaster for all of us, in accordance with the ancient truth that a kingdom, in this case our earth, divided against itself cannot stand. There is the concept of third world. Thus, we already have three worlds. Undoubtedly, however, the number is even greater. We are just too far away to see. Any ancient, deeply rooted autonomous culture, especially if it is spread on a wide part of the Earth's surface, constitutes an autonomous world, full of riddles and surprises to Western thinking. As a minimum, we must include in this category China, India, the Muslim world, and Africa, if indeed we accept the approximation of viewing the latter two as compact units. For 1,000 years, Russia belonged to such a category, although Western thinking systematically committed the mistake of denying its autonomous character and therefore never understood it, just as today the West does not understand Russia in communist captivity. It may be that in the past years, Japan has increasingly become a distant part of the West. I am no judge here. But as to Israel, for instance, it seems to me that it stands apart from the Western world in that its state system is fundamentally linked to religion. How short a time ago, relatively, the small new European world was easily seizing colonies everywhere, not only without anticipating any real resistance, but also usually despising any possible values in the conquered people's approach to life. On the face of it, it was an overwhelming success. There were no geographic frontiers to it. Western society expanded in a triumph of human independence and power. And all of a sudden, in the 20th century, came the discovery of its fragility and friability. We now see that the conquest proved to be short-lived and precarious, and this in turn points to defects in the Western view of the world which led to these conquests. Relations with the former colonial world now have turned into their opposite, and the Western world often goes to extremes of subservience. But it is difficult yet to estimate the total size of the bill which former colonial countries will present to the West. And it is difficult to predict whether the surrender, not only of its last colonies, but of everything it owns, will be sufficient for the West to foot the bill. But the blindness of superiority continues, in spite of all, and upholds the belief that vast regions everywhere on our planet should develop and mature to the level of present-day Western systems, which in theory are the best and in practice the most attractive. There is this belief that all those other worlds are only being temporarily prevented by wicked governments or by heavy crises or by their own barbarity and incomprehension from taking the way of Western pluralistic democracy and from adopting the Western way of life. Countries are judged on the merit of their progress in this direction. However, it is a conception which developed out of Western incomprehension of the essence of other worlds, out of the mistake of measuring them all with a Western yardstick. The real picture of our planet's development is quite different. Anguish about our divided world gave birth to the theory of convergence between leading Western countries and the Soviet Union. It is a soothing theory which overlooks the fact that these worlds are not at all developing into similarity. Neither one can be transformed into the other without the use of violence. Besides, convergence inevitably means acceptance of the other side's defects too, and this is hardly desirable. If I were today addressing an audience in my country, examining the overall pattern of the world's rifts, I would have concentrated on the East's calamities. But since my forced exile in the West has now lasted 4 years, and since my audience is a Western one, I think it may be of greater interest to concentrate on certain aspects of the West in our days, such as I see them. A decline in courage, Maybe the most striking feature which an outside observer notices in the West in our days. The Western world has lost its civil courage, both as a whole and separately in each country, each government, each political party, and, of course, in the United Nations. Such a decline in courage is particularly noticeable among the ruling groups and the intellectual elite, causing an impression of loss of courage by the entire society. Of course, there are many courageous individuals, but they have no determining influence on public life. Political and intellectual bureaucrats show depression, passivity, and perplexity in their actions and in their statements, and even more so in theoretical reflections to explain how realistic, reasonable, as well as intellectually and even morally warranted it is to base state policies on weakness and cowardice. And decline in courage is ironically emphasized by occasional explosions of anger and inflexibility on the part of the same bureaucrats when dealing with weak governments and weak countries not supported by anyone, or with currents which cannot offer any resistance. But they get tongue-tied and paralyzed when they deal with powerful governments and threatening forces, with aggressors and international terrorists. Should one point out that from ancient times declining courage has been considered the beginning of the end? When the modern Western states were created, the principle was proclaimed that governments are meant to serve man, and man lives to be free and to pursue happiness. See, for example, the American Declaration of Independence. Now, at last, during past decades, technical and social progress has permitted the realization of such aspirations, the welfare state. Every citizen has been granted the desired freedom and material goods in such quantity and of such quality as to guarantee in theory the achievement of happiness in the morally inferior sense of the word which has come into being during those same decades. In the process, however, one psychological detail has been overlooked: the constant desire to have still more things and a still better life, and the struggle to obtain them imprint many Western faces with worry and even depression, though it is customary to conceal such feelings. Active and tense competition fills all human thoughts without opening a way to free spiritual development. The individual's independence from many types of state pressure has been guaranteed. The majority of people have been granted well-being to an extent their fathers and grandfathers could not even dream about. It has become possible to raise young people according to these ideals, leading them to physical splendor, happiness, possession of material goods, money and leisure, to an almost unlimited freedom of enjoyment. So who should now renounce all this? Why and for what should one risk one's precious life in defense of common values, and particularly in such nebulous cases when the security of one's nation must be defended in a distant country?
Даже биология знает,
Even biology knows
что привычка
that habitual extreme safety and well-being are not advantageous for a living organism.
сегодня и в жизни западного
Today,
общества
well-being in the life of Western society
благополучие стало приоткрывать
has begun to
свою
reveal
губящую
its
маску.
pernicious mask.
Соответственно своим целям,
Western society
западное общество
has
избрало
given
наиболее
itself the
удобную для
organization
себя
best
форму
suited to its
существования,
purposes,
которую я назвал бы
based, I would say,
юридической.
on the letter of the law.
Границы прав и
The
правоты
limits of
человека
human rights and
очень
righteousness are
определяются системой
determined
законов.
by a system of laws.
В этом юридическом состоянии, движении и
Such
лавировании
limits are very broad.
западные люди приобрели большой
People
навык.
in the West have acquired considerable skill in interpreting and manipulating law.
Любой конфликт решается юридически.
Any conflict is solved according to the letter of the law, and this is considered to be the supreme solution. If one is right from a legal point of view,
После этого
nothing
никто не
more
может
is
ему
required.
указать
Nobody
на
may
неполную
mention
правоту,
that one could still not be entirely right and urge self-restraint, a
просить о
willingness
какой-то
to
жертве.
renounce such legal rights, sacrifice and selfless risk. It would sound simply absurd.
Добровольного самоограничения
One
почти не встретится.
almost never sees voluntary
Все
self-restraint.
стремятся к экспансии,
Everybody
хрустят юридические
operates
рамки.
at the extreme limit of those legal frames.
Всю жизнь проведя под коммунизмом,
I have spent all my life under a communist regime, and I will tell you
ужасно то общество,
that a society without any objective legal scale is a terrible one indeed.
но общество,
But a society
в котором
with
нет
no
других
other
весов,
scale but
кроме
the legal
юридического,
one,
тоже
is not
малодостойный
quite
человек.
worthy of man either.
Общество,
A society
ставшее на почву
which is
закона, но
based
не
on the
выше,
letter of the law and never reaches any higher, is taking very scarce advantage of the high level of human possibilities.
право
The
слишком
letter of the law is too
формально,
cold and formal
чтобы влиять на
to
общество
have a
благодетельно.
beneficial influence on society.
Когда вся жизнь
Whenever the tissue of life is woven of legalistic relations, there is an atmosphere of moral mediocrity,
омертвляющая
paralyzing man's noblest impulses.
перед испытаниями же грозящего
And it will be simply impossible to stand through the trials of this threatening century with only the support of a legalistic structure.
в сегодняшнем западном обществе
In today's Western society,
открылось
the
неравновесие
inequality has been revealed of freedom for good deeds and freedom for evil deeds.
и государственный деятель,
A statesman
который хочет для
who
своей
wants to
страны
achieve something
провести
important
крупное
and
созидательное
highly
дело,
constructive for his
вынужден
country
двигаться осмотрительно,
has to move cautiously and even timidly.
он все время облеплен
There
тысячами
are thousands
посмешищев,
of hasty and irresponsible critics
его все
around
время
him.
одергивает пресса и парламент.
Parliament and the press keep rebuffing him.
Ему нужно доказать высокую
As he moves ahead, he
и
has to
оправданность
prove
каждого
that
шага.
each single step of his is well-founded and absolutely flawless.
Человек выдающийся,
Actually, an outstanding and particularly gifted person
с необычными,
who has
неожиданными мерами.
unusual and unexpected initiatives in mind hardly gets a chance to
Ему в
assert
самом
himself.
начале подставят 10
From the
вопросов.
very beginning, dozens of traps will be set out for him.
Так, под видом демократического
Thus,
ограничения
mediocrity triumphs with the excuse of restrictions imposed by democracy.
отрыв административной власти
It is feasible and easy everywhere to undermine administrative
и все
power.
власти западных
And
стран
in fact,
резко
it
ослабли.
has been drastically weakened in all Western countries.
Защита прав личности
The defense of individual
доведена
rights
до той крайности,
has reached such extremes
что уже становится
as to make
беззащитным
society
само
as
общество.
a whole defenseless
И на Западе
against
приспела
certain
пора
individuals. It is
отстаивать
time in the West,
И на Западе приспела пора
it is time in the West
отстаивать
to
уже не столько
defend
права
not
людей,
so much human
сколько их
rights
обязанности.
as human obligations.
Напротив, свобода разрушительная.
Destructive and irresponsible freedom has been granted boundless space.
Общество оказалось слабо
Society appears to have little defense
от бездны человеческого
against the
падения.
abyss of human decadence,
Например, от
such
злоупотребления
as, for
свободой
example,
для морального
misuse of
насилия над
liberty for
юношеством,
moral violence against young people,
вроде фильмов с
such as motion pictures full of pornography, crime and horror.
Все они попали в область
It is
свободы.
considered to be part of freedom
И
and
теоретически
theoretically counterbalanced
свобода
by the young
юношества их не
people's right
воспринимать.
not to look or not to accept.
Так юридическая жизнь
Life organized legalistically has thus shown its inability to defend itself against the corrosion of evil.
Что же говорить о темных просторах
And
прямой
what
преступности?
shall we say about criminality as such?
Широта юридических рамок,
Legal frames,
особенно американских,
especially in the United States, are broad enough to encourage not only individual freedom but also certain individual crimes.
возможность остаться
The culprit can go unpunished or obtain undeserved leniency
при поддержке
with the
тысяч
support
общественных
of
защитников.
thousands of public defenders.
Если где власти
When the
берутся
government
строго искоренять
starts an
терроризм,
earnest fight against terrorism,
но общественность тут же обвиняет их,
public opinion immediately accuses it of violating the terrorists' civil rights.
немало подобных
There
примеров.
are many such cases.
Весь этот переклон свободы
Such a tilt of freedom in the direction of evil has come about gradually,
но первичная основа
but
его,
it was evidently born primarily
очевидно, была положена
out of a
гуманистически,
humanistic
человеколюбимым
and
представлением,
benevolent concept
что человек,
according
хозяин
to which
этого мира,
there is no
не несет в
evil
себе
inherent
внутреннего зла.
to human nature.
Все пороки
The world
жизни
belongs to mankind, and all the defects of life are caused by wrong social systems which must be corrected.
странно.
Strangely
Вот на
enough,
Западе достигнуты
though the best
наилучшие социальные
social
условия,
conditions have been achieved in the
а
West,
преступность,
there
несомненно,
still is
велика,
criminality,
и значительно больше,
and there even is considerably more of it than in the pauper and lawless Soviet society.
широчайшей свободой, естественно, пользуется
The
и пресса.
press, too, of course, enjoys the widest freedom.
Я употребляю дальше это слово,
I
включая
shall be
все
using
медиа.
the word press to include all media.
Но как?
But what sort of use
Опять, лишь бы не
does it
перешагнуть
make of this
юридические
freedom?
рамки.
Here again, the main concern is not to infringe the letter of the law.
Подлинной
There
нравственной
is no
ответственности.
true moral responsibility for deformation or disproportion.
Какая у журналиста и газеты
What sort of responsibility does a journalist or a newspaper have to his readers or to his history?
если они
If they
неверной
have
информацией
misled
или
public
неверными
opinion
заключениями повели
or the
общественное
government
мнение
by
по
inaccurate
неверному пути,
information or wrong
даже
conclusions,
способствовали государственным ошибкам, известно ли
do we know of any cases
публичного потом
of
раскаяния
public
этого
recognition
журналиста
and
или этой газеты?
rectification of such mistakes by the same journalist or the same
Нет,
newspaper?
это подорвало бы продажу.
It hardly ever happens because it would damage sales.
На этом случае может потерять
A
государство.
nation may be the victim of such a
Но
mistake,
журналист всегда
but the journalist usually always gets away with it.
скорее всего, он теперь будет с новым оплотом.
One may safely assume that he will start writing the opposite with renewed self-assurance.
Необходимость дать мгновенную,
Because
авторитетную
instant and
информацию
credible information has to be given,
заставляет заполнять
it becomes
пустоту,
necessary to
доказывать,
resort to guesswork,
собирать слухи,
rumors,
предположения,
and suppositions
которые потом никогда
to
не
fill in the
опровергнутся.
voids, and none of them will ever be rectified. They will stay on in the reader's memory.
Сколько поспешных,
How many hasty,
незрелых,
immature, superficial, and misleading judgments are expressed every day,
заморочивает мозги
confusing
читателей,
readers
так застывает.
without any verification.
Пресса имеет возможность
The press can
и симулировать
both
общественное
simulate
мнение,
public
и
opinion
воспитать его извращенно.
and miseducate it.
То создается Геростратова
Thus,
слава
we may
террористов,
see terrorists described as heroes,
то раскрываются даже
or secret matters
оборонные тайны своей
pertaining to
страны.
one's nation's defense publicly revealed. or we may witness shameless intrusion on the privacy of well-known people under the slogan, "Everyone is entitled to know everything." But this is a false slogan, characteristic of a false era. People also have the right not to know, and it's a much more valuable one. The right not to have their divine souls A person who works and leads a meaningful life does not need this excessive, burdening flow of information. Hastiness and superficiality are the psychic disease of the 20th century. And more than anywhere else, this disease is reflected in the press. Such as it is, however, the press has become the greatest power within the Western countries, more powerful than the legislative power, the executive, and the judiciary. And one would then like to ask, by what law has it been elected and to whom is it responsible? In the communist East, a journalist is frankly appointed as a state official. But who has granted Western journalists their power? For how long a time and with what prerogatives? There is yet another surprise for someone coming from the East, where the press is rigorously unified. One gradually discovers a common trend of preferences within the Western press as a whole. It is a fashion. There are generally accepted patterns of judgment. There may be common corporate interests. The sum effect being not competition, but unification. Enormous freedom exists for the press, but not for the readership. Because newspapers mostly give enough stress and emphasis to those opinions which do not too openly contradict their own and the general trend. Without any censorship, in the West, fashionable trends of thought and ideas are carefully separated from those which are not fashionable. Nothing is forbidden, but what is not fashionable will hardly ever find its way into periodicals or books or be heard in colleges. Legally, your researches are free, but they are conditioned by the fashion of the day. There is no open violence, such as in the East. However, a selection dictated by fashion and the need to match mass standards frequently prevent independent-minded people from giving their contribution to public life. There is a dangerous tendency to flock together and shut off successful development. I have received letters in America from highly intelligent persons, maybe a teacher in a far-away small college, who could do much for the renewal and salvation of his country. But his country cannot hear him, because the media are not interested in him. This gives birth to strong mass prejudices, to blindness, which is most dangerous in our dynamic era. There is, for instance, a self-deluding interpretation of the contemporary world situation. It works as a sort of a petrified armor around people's minds. Human voices from 17 countries of Eastern Europe and Eastern Asia cannot pierce it. It will only be broken by the pitiless crowbar of events. I have mentioned a few traits of Western life which surprise and shock a new arrival to this world. The purpose and scope of this speech will not allow me to continue such a review, to look into the influence of these Western characteristics on important aspects of a nation's life, such as elementary education, advanced education in the humanities, and art. It is almost universally recognized that the West shows all the world a way to successful economic development, even though in the past years it has been strongly disturbed by chaotic inflation. However, many people living in the West are dissatisfied with their own society. They despise it or accuse it of not being up to the level of maturity attained by mankind. A number of such critics turn to socialism, which is a false and dangerous current. I hope that no one present will suspect me of offering my personal criticism of the Western system to present socialism as an alternative. Having experienced applied socialism in a country where the alternative has been realized, I certainly will not speak for it. The well-known Soviet mathematician Shafarevich, a member of the Soviet Academy of Science, has written a brilliant book under the title Socialism. It is a profound analysis showing that socialism of any type and shade leads to a total destruction of the human spirit and to a leveling of mankind into death. Shafarevich's book was published in France. Shafarevich's book was published in France almost 2 years ago, and so far no one has been found to refute it. It will shortly be published in the United States. But should someone ask me whether I would indicate the West such as it is today as a model to my country, frankly, I would have to answer negatively. No, I could not recommend your society in its present state as an ideal for the transformation of ours. Through intense suffering, our country has now achieved a spiritual development of such intensity that the Western system, in its present state of spiritual exhaustion, does not look attractive. Even those characteristics of your life which I have just mentioned are extremely saddening. A fact which cannot be disputed is the weakening of human beings in the West, while in the East they are becoming firmer and stronger. 60 years for our people and 30 years for the people of Eastern Europe. During that time, we have been through a spiritual training far in advance of Western experience. Life's complexity and mortal weight have produced stronger, deeper, and more interesting characters than those generated by standardized Western well-being. Therefore, if our society were to be transformed into yours, it would mean an improvement in certain aspects, but also a change for the worse on some particularly significant scores. It is true, no doubt, that a society cannot remain in an abyss of lawlessness, as is the case in our country, but it is also demeaning for it to elect such mechanical legalistic smoothness as you have. After the suffering of many years of violence and oppression, the human soul longs for things higher, warmer and purer than those offered by today's mass living habits, introduced by the revolting invasion of publicity, by TV stupor and by intolerable music.
Бывают симптоматичные предупреждения,
there are meaningful warnings
которые посылает
which
история
history gives
угрожаемому
a
и
threatened
гибнущему
or
обществу.
perishing society.
Например,
Such
падение
are,
искусства
for instance, the decadence of
или
art
отсутствие
or
великих
a lack of
государственных
great
деятелей.
statesmen.
Иногда предупреждения
There
бывают
are open and evident
совсем
warnings
ощутимыми,
too.
вполне прямыми. Центр вашей
The
демократии
center
и
of your
культуры
democracy
на
and of
несколько
your
часов
culture
остается без
is
электричества.
left without electric power for a few hours only.
И сразу же
And all
целые
of a
толпы
sudden,
американских граждан
crowds of American
бросаются
citizens
грабить и насиловать.
start looting and creating havoc.
Такова толщина пленки.
The smooth surface film must be very
Такова
thin then.
непрочность
The
общественного
social
строя
system quite
и
unstable
отсутствие внутреннего
and
здоровья.
unhealthy.
Не когда-то наступит, а уже идет
The fight for our planet,
физическая,
physical and spiritual, a fight of cosmic
борьба за
proportions,
нашу планету.
is not a vague matter of the future. It has
Свое
already
решающее
started.
наступление
The
идет и
forces of
давит
evil
мировое зло.
have begun their offensive.
А ваши
You
экраны
can feel their
и
pressure,
печатные
and yet your
издания
screens and
наполнены
publications
обязательными
are full of
улыбками и
prescribed
поднятыми
smiles
бокалами.
and raised glasses.
Радость чему?
What is the joy about?
Ваши весьма видные деятели
Very well-known representatives of your society, such as George Kennan, say,
вступая в область большой политики,
we cannot
мы уже
apply
не можем
moral
пользоваться
criteria
моральными
to
указателями.
politics.
Вот так,
Thus,
смешением добра
we
и зла,
mix good and evil,
правоты и
right
неправоты,
and wrong,
лучше всего и
and make
подготовляется
space
почва
for the
для
absolute
абсолютного торжества,
triumph
абсолютного
of
зла.
absolute evil in the world.
Против мировой, хорошо
On
продуманной
the
стратегии
contrary,
коммунизма
only moral criteria can help the West
Западу только и
against
могут помочь
communism's
нравственные указатели,
well-planned world
а
strategy.
других нет.
There are no other criteria.
А соображения любой конъюнктуры
Practical or occasional
всегда рухнут
considerations
перед
of any
стратегией.
kind will inevitably be swept away by strategy.
Юридическое мышление
After a certain level of the problem has been
каменится.
reached, legalistic
Оно не
thinking
дает
induces
видеть ни
paralysis.
размера, ни
It
смысла
prevents
событий.
one from seeing the size and meaning of events.
Несмотря на множественность информации,
In spite of the abundance of information, or maybe because of it,
западный мир
the
весьма
West
слабо
has
ориентируется.
difficulties in understanding reality such as it is.
Таковы, например, были анекдотические
There have been
предсказания
naive predictions
некоторых
by
американских
some
экспертов,
American experts
что Советский
who
Союз
believed
найдет
that
себе в Анголе
Angola
свой
would
Вьетнам,
become the Soviet Union's Vietnam,
или что наглые африканские экспедиции
or
Кубы
that Cuban expeditions in
лучше
Africa
всего умерятся
would best be stopped
ухаживанием за
by
ней
special
Соединенных Штатов.
U.S. courtesy to Cuba.
Таковы ж и советы Кеннана своей
Kennan's
стране
advice to his own country
приступить к
to begin
одностороннему разоружению.
unilateral disarmament belongs to the same category.
О, знали бы вы,
If you only knew
как хохочут
how the
над
youngest
вашими
of the
политическими
Kremlin
мудрецами
officials
самые
laugh
молоденькие
at your
референты Старой
political
площади.
wizards.
А уж Фидель Кастро
As to Fidel Castro,
откровенно считает Соединенные Штаты
frankly
ничтожеством,
scorns the United States,
если, находясь тут рядом,
sending his troops
осмеливается
to
бросать свои
distant
войска на далекие
adventures from
авантюры.
his country right next to yours.
Но самый жестокий промах
However,
произошел с
the most
непониманием
cruel mistake
Вьетнамской
occurred
войны.
with the failure to understand the Vietnam War.
Одни искренне хотели,
Some people sincerely
чтобы
wanted
только скорее
all
прекратилась
wars
всякая
to
война.
stop just as soon as possible.
Другие мнили,
Others believed
что надо дать
that there
простор
should be room
национальному
for national or communist self-determination in Vietnam or in Cambodia, as we see today with particular clarity. But members of the U.S. anti-war movement wound up being involved in the betrayal of Far Eastern nations, in a genocide and in the suffering today imposed on 30 million people there. Do those convinced pacifists hear the moans coming from there? Do they understand their responsibility today, or do they prefer not to hear? The American intelligentsia lost its nerve, and as a consequence thereof, danger has come much closer to the United States. But there is no awareness of this. Your short-sighted politician who signed the hasty Vietnam capitulation seemingly gave America a carefree breathing pause. However, a hundredfold Vietnam now looms over you. That small Vietnam had been a warning and an occasion to mobilize the nation's courage. But if a full-fledged America suffered a real defeat from a small communist half-country, how can the West hope to stand firm in the future? I have had occasion already to say that in the 20th century, Western democracy has not won any major war without help and protection from a powerful continental ally whose philosophy and ideology it did not question. In World War II against Hitler, instead of winning that war with its own forces, which would certainly have been sufficient, Western democracy grew and cultivated another enemy who would prove worse, as Hitler never had so many resources and so many people, nor did he offer any attractive ideas or have a large number of supporters in the West as the Soviet Union. At present, some Western voices already have spoken of obtaining protection from a third power against aggression in the next world conflict, if there is one. In this case, the shield would be China. But I would not wish such an outcome to any country in the world. First of all, it is again a doomed alliance with evil. Also, it would grant the United States a respite. But when, at a later date, China, with its billion people, would turn around armed with American weapons, America itself would fall prey to a genocide similar to the one in Cambodia in our days. And yet, no weapons, no matter how powerful, can help the West until it overcomes its loss of willpower. In a state of psychological weakness, weapons become a burden for the capitulating side. To defend oneself, one must also be ready to die. There is little such readiness in a society raised in the code of material well-being. Nothing is left then but concessions, attempts to gain time, and betrayal. Thus, at the shameful Belgrade conference, free Western diplomats, in their weakness, surrendered the line where enslaved members of Helsinki watch groups are sacrificing their lives.
Западное мышление
Western thinking
стало консервативным.
has become conservative.
Только бы сохранялось
The
мировое
world
положение,
situation should stay
как оно
as it
есть.
is at any cost.
Только бы ничто
There
не
should be
менялось.
no changes.
Расслабляющая мечта
This debilitating dream of a status quo
признак
is the
общества,
symptom of a society which has come to the end of its development.
но надо быть слепым, чтобы
But
не
one
видеть,
must be blind in order not to see that oceans no longer belong to the West,
под ним территорию
while land under its domination keeps
две
shrinking.
так называемых мировых
The two so-called world wars, they were by far not on a world scale,
состояли
not
в том,
yet,
что маленький
have meant
прогрессивный Запад
internal self-destruction
внутри
of the
себя
small
уничтожал
progressive
сам
West,
себя и тем подготовил
which
свой
has
конец.
thus prepared its own end.
Следующая война
The next war,
не обязательно
which does
атомная,
not have
я
to
в
be
нее
an
не верю,
atomic one, and I do not believe it
может
will,
похоронить западную
may well
цивилизацию
bury
окончательно.
Western civilization forever.
И перед лицом этой опасности,
Facing such a danger,
как же, с такими
with such
историческими
splendid
ценностями
historical values in your
с
past,
таким уровнем
at such
достигнутой
a high
свободы,
level of realization of freedom and of devotion to
настолько
freedom,
потерять волю к
how is
защите,
it possible to lose to such an extent the will to defend oneself?
как сложилось нынешнее невыгодное событие?
How has this unfavorable relation of forces come about?
От своего триумфального
How
шествия,
did the West
каким образом Запад
decline
попал в такую
from its
немощь?
triumphal march to its present sickness?
Были в его развитии губительные
Have there
переломы?
been fatal turns and losses of direction in its development? It does not seem so.
Запад только
The West
прогрессировал и
kept
прогрессировал
advancing
в
socially
объявленном
in
социальном
accordance
направлении,
with its proclaimed
об руку
intentions,
с блистательным
with the
техническим
help of
прогрессом,
brilliant technological progress.
и вдруг оказался в
And all of a sudden, it found itself in its present state of weakness.
И тогда остается искать ошибки
This means that the mistake
в самом
must
корне,
be at the root,
в основе
at the very
мышления нового
basis of
времени.
human thinking in the past centuries.
Я имею в виду то
I
господствующее
refer
на
to the
Западе
prevailing
миросознание,
Western view of the world,
которое родилось в
which was
возрождении,
first born during the
а
Renaissance
политические формы
and found its political expression from the period of the Enlightenment.
легло в основу всех
It
государств
became the
и
basis for
общественных
government and social science
и может быть названо
and could be defined as
рационалистическим
rationalistic
гуманизмом
humanism
или гуманистической автономией,
or humanistic autonomy,
провозглашенной
the proclaimed and enforced autonomy of man
от всякой высшей
from any higher force above him.
либо иначе антропоцентризм,
It could also be called anthropocentricity, with man seen as the center of everything that exists.
сам по себе поворот возрождения
The turn introduced by the
был,
Renaissance
очевидно, исторически
evidently
неизбежен.
was inevitable historically.
Средние века исчерпали
The Middle
себя,
Ages had come to a natural end by
стали
exhaustion,
невыносимы
becoming an
фактическим
intolerable
подавлением
despotic repression
физической природы человека
of man's
в
physical
пользу
nature
духовной.
in favor of the spiritual
Но и мы
one.
отринулись и
Then, however, we turned our backs upon the spirit and embraced all that is material with excessive and unwarranted zeal.
заявившие себя
This
нашим
new way of
руководителем,
thinking, which had imposed on
не
us its
признало в
guidance,
человеке внутреннего
did not
зла,
admit the existence of
не признало за
intrinsic
человеком
evil in man,
иных задач
nor did it see any
выше
higher
земного
task
счастья
than the attainment of happiness on
и
earth.
положило в основу современной
It
западной
based
цивилизации
modern Western civilization on
опасный уклон
the
в
dangerous
преклонение
trend
перед
to
человеком
worship man
и его
and his
материальными
material
потребностями.
needs.
За пределами физического благополучия
Everything beyond
и
physical
накопления
well-being
материальных благ,
and accumulation of
все
material
другие,
goods,
более тонкие и
all other
высокие
human requirements
особенности
and
и
characteristics of a
потребности
subtler and higher nature
остались вне внимания
were left outside
государственных
the area
устройств,
of attention of state and social systems,
как если бы человек
as
не
if
имел более
human
высокого
life
смысла жизни.
did not have any superior sense,
Так и оставлены были сквозняки для зла,
that provided access for
которые
evil,
сегодня и продувают
of which in
свободу.
our days there is a free and constant flow.
Сама по себе обнаженная свобода
Merely freedom
никак не решает
does not
всех
in the
проблем
least solve
человеческого
all the problems
существования,
of human life,
а во множестве
and it
ставит
even
новые.
adds a number of new ones. However, in early democracies, as in the American democracy at the time of its birth, all individual human rights were granted because man is God's creature. That is, freedom was given to the individual conditionally, in the assumption of his constant religious responsibility. Such was the heritage of the preceding 1,000 years. 200 or even 50 years ago, it would have seemed quite impossible in America that an individual could be granted boundless freedom simply for the satisfaction of his instincts or whims. Subsequently, however, all such limitations were discarded everywhere in the West. A total liberation occurred from the moral heritage of Christian centuries with their great reserves of mercy and sacrifice. State systems were becoming increasingly and totally materialistic. The West ended up by truly enforcing human rights, sometimes even excessively. But man's sense of responsibility to God and society grew dimmer and dimmer. In the past decades, the legalistically selfish aspect of Western approach and thinking has reached its final dimension, and the world wound up in a harsh spiritual crisis and a political impasse. All the glorified technological achievements of progress, including the conquest of outer space, do not redeem the 20th century's moral poverty, which no one could imagine even as late as in the 19th century. As humanism in its development became more and more materialistic, it made itself increasingly accessible to speculation and manipulation by socialism and then by communism. So that Karl Marx was able to say that communism is naturalized humanism. The statement turned out to be not entirely senseless. One does see the same stones in the foundations of a spiritualist humanism and of any type of socialism. Endless materialism. Freedom from religion and religious responsibility, which under communist regimes reach the stage of anti-religious dictatorship. Concentration on social structures with a seemingly scientific approach. This is typical of the Enlightenment in the 18th century and of Marxism. Not by coincidence, all of communism's meaningless pledges and oaths are about man with a capital M and his earthly happiness. At first glance, it seems an ugly parallel. Common traits in the thinking and way of life of today's West and today's East. But such is the logic of materialistic development. The interrelationship is such, too, that the current of materialism, which is most to the left, always ends up by being stronger, more attractive and victorious, because it is more consistent. Humanism, without its Christian heritage, cannot resist such competition. We watch this process in the past centuries, and especially in the past decades, on a world scale, as the situation becomes increasingly dramatic. Liberalism was inevitably displaced by radicalism. Radicalism had to surrender to socialism, and socialism could never resist communism. The communist regime in the East could stand and grow due to the enthusiastic support from an enormous number of Western intellectuals who felt a kinship and refused to see communism's crimes. And when they no longer could do so, they tried to justify them. In our eastern countries, communism has suffered a complete ideological defeat. It is zero and less than zero. But Western intellectuals still look at it with interest and with empathy. And this is precisely what makes it so immensely difficult for the West to withstand the East. I am not examining here the case of a world war disaster and the changes which it would produce in society. As long as we wake up every morning under a peaceful sun, we have to lead an everyday life. There is a disaster, however, which has already been underway for quite some time. I am referring to the calamity of a despiritualized and irreligious humanistic consciousness. To such consciousness, man is the touchstone in judging everything on earth. Imperfect man, who is never free of pride, self-interest, envy, vanity, and dozens of other defects. We are now experiencing the consequences of mistakes which had not been noticed at the beginning of the journey. On the way from the Renaissance to our days, we have enriched our experience, but we have lost the concept of a supreme, complete entity which used to restrain our passions and our irresponsibility. We have placed too much hope in political and social reforms, only to find out that we were being deprived of our most precious possession, our spiritual life. In the East, it is destroyed by the dealings and machinations of the ruling party. In the West, commercial interests suffocated. This is the real crisis. The split in the world is less terrible The split in the world is less terrible than the similarity of the disease plaguing its main sections. If humanism were right in declaring that man is born only to be happy, he would not be born to die. Since his body is doomed to die, his task on earth evidently must be of a more spiritual nature. It cannot be unrestrained enjoyment of everyday life. It cannot be the search for the best ways to obtain material goods and then cheerfully get the most of them. It has to be the fulfillment of a permanent, earnest duty, so that one's life journey may become an experience of moral growth, so that one may leave life a better human being than one started it. It is imperative to review the table of widespread human values. Its present incorrectness is astounding. It is not possible that assessment of the President's performance be reduced to the question of how much money one makes or of unlimited availability of gasoline. Only voluntary, inspired self-restraint can raise man above the world stream of materialism. It would be retrogression to attach oneself today to the ossified formulas of the Enlightenment. Social dogmatism leaves us completely helpless in front of the trials of our times. Even if we are spared destruction by war, our lives will have to change if we want to save life from self-destruction. We cannot avoid revising the fundamental definitions of human life and human society. Is it true that man is above everything? Is there no superior spirit above him?
Верно ли,
Is it
что
right
жизнь человека,
that man's life
деятельность общества
and society's
должны более
activities
всего
have
определяться
to be determined
материальной
by
экспансией?
material expansion in the first place?
Допустимо ли развивать
Is
ее
it permissible
в
to
ущерб
promote
нашей
such
целостной
expansion
внутренней
to the
жизни?
detriment of our spiritual integrity?
Если не к гибели,
If the world has not come to its end, it has approached
по значению
a
равному
major
повороту
turn
от
in
средних
history,
веков к
equal in
Возрождению,
importance to the turn from the Middle
потребует от нас
Ages to the
духовной
Renaissance.
вспышки,
It will exact
подъема
from us
на
a
новую
spiritual
высоту обзора,
upsurge. We shall have to
на
rise
новый
to a
уровень
new
жизни,
height of vision, to a new
где
level of
не
life,
будет, как в средние
where our
века,
physical nature
предана проклятию
will not
наша
be
физическая
cursed
природа,
as in the Middle Ages.
но и тем более не
But
будет,
even more importantly,
как в новейшее
our
время
spiritual being
растоптана
will
наша
not
духовность.
be trampled upon as in the modern era.
Этот подъем
This ascension
подобен
will be
восхождению
similar to
на
climbing
следующую
onto the next
антропологическую ступень.
anthropologic stage.
И ни у кого на земле
No one on
не
earth
осталось другого
has
выхода,
any
как вверх.
other way left but upward.